Over the last few weeks, we've been looking at the story of Joseph and how he made the transition from favored son to slave to prisoner and finally to the governor of Egypt. Now, throughout most of that time, his father and his brothers have sort of vanished from the narrative, and here they come back into view. Now, if you remember from the story last week, Joseph correctly predicted that there were going to be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. And so Egypt started making preparations for the hard times. Now, the famine that Joseph predicted didn't just come to the land of Egypt. It seems to have been a regional famine. And so the land of Canaan, where his father and brothers live, is also affected. His family comes to the brink of starvation, and then they hear that there's food to be had in Egypt. And so Jacob sends all of his remaining sons, with the exception of Benjamin, Joseph's full brother, who happens to be the one who didn't betray him. He's also the only remaining child of Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel. And so the brothers head down to Egypt to buy food. And when they get there, they encounter Joseph, who's overseeing the food distribution program. Now, at this point, we might expect Joseph to out himself to them. We might expect him to have a reaction that falls somewhere along a continuum between, hey guys, it's me, Joseph, your brother. Remember you sold me into slavery? Well, things are looking up for me right now, so hey, that's just water under the bridge. To, on the other extreme, hey guys, it's me, your brother Joseph. Remember when you sold me into slavery? Yeah, that wasn't much fun, but I'm going to have a lot more fun now that I'm selling you all into slavery. But Joseph's reaction isn't like either of these or anything in between. Instead, he seems to be coy with them. He does something that looks like a cat and mouse game. So is Joseph playing head games with his brothers in how he responds? No, he's actually testing his brothers. Joseph's relationship with them was so toxic that he was abused in pretty much the worst way possible. They actually were intending to kill him when they decided instead to be merciful and sell him as a slave. And he wants to know if he can re-enter relationship with them. Have they learned their lesson? Have they become the kind of people with whom he can now relate? Or are they the kind of people that maybe he'd be best send on his way and not let them know anything, not let them become any wiser about what happened? And so Joseph begins by putting them on the back foot, accusing them of being spies, seeking out the weaknesses of the land. And he does this as a clever subterfuge in order to try and flush out information about the rest of his family. He wants to know in particular, is his father still alive? And is his brother Benjamin, the one who didn't betray him, still alive? Once he's found out that, he starts a test. Well, 3 tests really. Commentator Alan Ross notes that Joseph puts his brothers through the test of conscience, the test of favoritism, and the test of loyal love. And we'll dig into each one of these just a little bit to understand what he's doing. So he starts with the test of conscience. His accusation that they are spies is a serious one, and they've told him about his family, so he says, okay, I'll tell you what. I'm going to throw you guys all in prison, and one of you can go back and get this brother that you say, in order to prove to him that this is not some cover story that they've got, but the actual truth. But he throws them all into jail for 3 days. There's an old adage that says that who you truly are comes out when you're under pressure. So he squeezes them to see what comes out. On top of that, in the modern world, there's a far more karmic view of justice. If you do bad things, if you treat somebody bad, then the gods themselves are going to engineer situations where you're going to be hurt in order to bring about justice. And Joseph's brothers seem to think this way. They said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. And that's why this distress has come on us." So Joseph understands now that he's not the only one who suffered because of what they did. He understands that their consciences have been wounded by the way that they treated him, so much so that they live in fear of divine retribution for their mistreatment of him. Well, that's a good sign. So Joseph modifies the plan at this point. He says, okay, you know what? I'm a God-fearing person. I'll let all of you except one go back. And then you need to bring your brother Benjamin with you next time you come in order to prove that you're not spies, or else you're not getting any food. But Joseph secretly arranges for the brothers' payment to be put back into their sacks. And so when they leave on the way home, one of them opens up the food bag and realizes that the money that he brought to pay them is back in his bag. And they all do likewise, and they all find that the money is back. And this ups the stakes for whether or not they're willing to abandon their brother Simeon to slavery in Egypt. Because they know that when they return, they might be accused of having stolen the grain that they took in the first place. So they go back to the land of Canaan and meet with their father and explain what happened to them. And their father is unwilling to let them take Benjamin and go. He's willing to write off Simeon rather than risk Benjamin. Benjamin seems to be the new favorite. And so the brothers wait. But sometime later, maybe a year, the food runs out. And they are still on the brink of starvation. And the whole family is going to die unless they all go and get more food. And so Jacob is reluctant to let Benjamin go. And when Judah personally guarantees Benjamin's safety, he relents and allows all of his remaining sons to go to the land of Egypt to buy more grain. When they arrive, they're invited to have lunch with Joseph. And they fear that he's going to use the stolen grain as a pretext to throw them all in prison. So they're very afraid. They go to the steward and they explain, hey, we paid for our grain, but somehow the money ended up back in our sacks. We don't know how it happened. Here's the money that we owed from before, and we brought more to buy more. And he says, hey, no worries. We got payment. I don't know what happened. Your God must have put that money back in the sack or something like that, but we're square. So this is a relief to them. They're invited in, and Joseph actually treats them kindly. He feeds them all, although he sits at a different table because Egyptians wouldn't eat with filthy Canaanites. But he gives Benjamin 5 times more food. The next test, the test of favoritism. You see, Joseph's relationship with his brothers was poisoned because of his father's favoritism. Now, he surmised that Benjamin is the new recipient of his father's favoritism now that he's gone. And so by giving him more food, he's trying to see if that arouses the resentment of his brothers, seeing his brother, their brother, being given preferential treatment. Nobody says anything, and so that's a good sign that they're passing the next test. And so he sends them home with their grain. But he has his steward place a silver cup of his in Benjamin's sack. And Benjamin and the others leave not knowing that this has happened to them. The steward catches up with them shortly later and accuses them of having stolen from them. And they say, no, if we've stolen, we'll all be your slaves. And so he opens up the sacks one at a time. Of course, he leaves Benjamin for last, and he opens it up, and there's the cup in Benjamin's sack. And they all go back to plead for Benjamin. And Joseph says, no, don't worry about it. You guys can go free, but Benjamin, he's going to have to stay as a slave. And that's when Judah sets aside his own well-being, his own safety, his own freedom, and says, please, our father is going to die from heartbreak if he's taken as a captive. Let me be taken instead. Let me take his place. At this point, the brothers have shown loyal love. They've shown that they love their fathers. They love their brother more than they love their own freedom, more than their desire to save their skin or get their own way. Joseph realizes now that his brothers have been radically changed in the 22 years or so since he last saw them. And it's at that point that he's able to reveal his identity to them. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all of his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But the brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." And when they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler over Egypt." So at this point in the story, the brothers go back to Canaan. They pick up dad and their whole family, and they relocate to Egypt where there's food. And Jacob finally gets a reunion with Joseph, his son. And the family stays there. 17 years later, Jacob breathes his last and dies. But you see, Joseph's forgiveness seems almost too good to be true. And so his brothers worry that he's going to get revenge on them. They worry that they are going to be the Fredo to his Michael. Now that dad's gone, Joseph's going to finally settle the score. And so we read that when Joseph's brothers saw their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" So they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs that they committed in treating you so badly. Now please, forgive the sins of your servants of the God of your father." When their message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. "We're your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Joseph's forgiveness seems almost too good to be true to his brothers. You see, Joseph understands that his brother's treachery was all part of God's providence. And because he so clearly sees that, he's able to let go the wrongs that were committed against him. Now, we experience bad things, the ways in which people mistreat us, unfortunate circumstances that land on us. But we seldom see so clearly what God is accomplishing through them. And so, are we able, like Joseph, to lay aside the bad things that happen to us and to allow God's sovereign will to function in the good things and in the bad things? Our experiences shape us, don't they? The good things that happen have made us different people, but so have the bad things. And we might wish that all of those uncomfortable things, tragic things, unjust things that have happened to us didn't happen to us. But maybe those things had to happen in order for God's plan to happen the way that he intended, just as Joseph's situation was all about bringing God's plan to fulfillment. And so we have to ask ourselves, can we trust God? God who allows us to walk through hard times so that the greater good can be accomplished. Paul promises us that it is in allowing God to work through us, in enduring the circumstances that we do, that we know that God's will is being achieved. That's why he says, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purposes. Now, that's not to say that all of the terrible things that happened in your life were God's perfect will. I don't believe that they were. But that God is still using those things in order to bring about his great salvation to creation. As people who follow him, who pray a prayer, God, may your kingdom come, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Can we embrace the difficulties, knowing that they are bringing about God's will on earth as it is in heaven? Do we trust the character of the God who works with us, or do we stand in opposition to that, saying that we know better? Can we learn to forgive like Joseph, even when we don't see God's will quite as clearly as Joseph?